It is time for Bryce Young to officially break out in his third NFL season. Now that he finally has a true wide receiver one, we dig into the Panthers' top three storylines entering 2025 on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk. And when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with the NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Today, we have a fun episode talking about the Carolina Panthers and their top three storylines going into the 2025 season. And number one has to be Bryce Young needs to officially break out, right? Like, he showed promise at the end of last year, finally, after a disastrous year and a half into the NFL. But going into his second year with Dave Canales, getting Tetairoa McMillan, who's a huge storyline as well. How big of a ceiling does he have in his rookie season in fantasy? And then playing with Adam Thielen, does he have anything left? And of course, that backfield with Chuba Hubbard, Rico Dowdle, and then they drafted another running back, and then they had Jonathan Brooks from last year. Does he come back? So we're going to discuss all of this today. Let's start with Bryce Young. He's right now sitting as quarterback 23 in consensus rankings, which means people are not expecting him to take a big step forward from last year, because last year he was the quarterback 24 on average scoring. And right now he's sitting behind guys like Trevor Lawrence and Tua Tagovailoa and Matthew Stafford and JJ McCarthy. I do think he's being undervalued right now. And I do think he has a much higher ceiling than quarterback 23.
Yeah, and the other thing that he can do is run when needed. So that's part of his repertoire. He's had some games where he's had multiple touchdowns on the ground. He's got weapons. And keep in mind, the first year, it was terrible. It was just a lost year with Frank Reich. That was just a disaster. There was no real offensive plan for this team. And then they had to make the transition to Dave Canales, was essentially turned out to be Bryce Young's rookie year, just like relearning an offense, getting settled. But we also know Dave Canales and his history when he's been on an offensive staff. He turned Geno Smith into a top 12 QB in fantasy in Seattle, helped then Baker Mayfield as the coordinator and play caller there in Tampa turn into what he is now. And he took another step with Liam Cohen. But we're looking for Bryce Young to take that first big step into being a viable fantasy quarterback. He was even to the point of where even in 2 QB and Superflex leagues, it was really hard to start him unless the matchup was right, because you just didn't see a lot from this offense. It was very anemic. But I think the arrow is pointing in the right direction here with Tetairoa McMillan. This is the missing element. And we'll see what they do. I think at tight end, they've had some pieces, but Ja'Tavion Sanders could become a bigger factor here. Adam Thielen is back, and he seems a little bit ageless as a big slot target. Then, look, we've seen flashes from Xavier Legette, but more so from even Jalen Coker. So, look, putting it all together, it's not a juicy receiving core. It's not going to be confused with the team we just talked about the previous show with the Buccaneers. No one's going to say this is up there, and that's what Canales had part of when he was in Tampa. And then in Seattle, of course, he had DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. So, look, McMillan, this is the key, I think. If McMillan can live up to that, even that wide receiver 3 ranking, and we'll talk a little bit more about his value and how he could stand out among these receivers, then you're talking some special numbers here for Bryce Young. Because if you have a number one guy that's putting up numbers, and it trickles down to Thielen, and Legette and Coker are more like complementary targets that are kind of number 3s. And then they get the tight ends involved to a limited degree here. And you consistently throw better to the backs with Chuba Hubbard or Rico Dowdle, then you're starting to piece together some numbers. Now, the Panthers, what was weird is they were so terrible defensively last year. So you'd think there would have been a lot of garbage for Bryce Young. They're still not very good. They've invested quite a bit to try to get the pass rush on track, 2 edge rushers in the draft, really trying their best. But I think they'll still stink on that side of the ball for the The volume should be there. If the volume's there for Bryce Young, he's doing a little bit of running and pushing it downfield. Look, we're not going to say his breakout is going into like QB 10. We're not going to expect that. That's just hard for any quarterback to do. But he comes more in the radar of being playable. I mean, when you're QB 24 and then you're bumped up one spot, it seems odd to me when there are some improvements in the trajectory of the back half of last season. I'd say he should be a little bit higher than that. So when you look at some of these guys, I think you weigh it. Say J.J. McCarthy ranked in that area. Well, he's got Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and T.J. Hawkinson. So that might lift McCarthy, but then you look at a Tua Tagovailoa, he's got the receivers, but he's not going to give you much as a runner. So these are really hard things to decipher late. I think this group of quarterbacks, there could be a really weird range of outcomes for these guys. Trevor Lawrence could break out of here. Bryce Young could. And then some of them could fall by the wayside in this kind of tier, including Geno Smith, Sam Darnold types, right? So I think these quarterbacks are interesting. I think there's going to be a very good value here among the QB2s to help you in Superflex or 2 QB, or even give you a backup if you can stream and platoon. I think Bryce Young has to be on that radar pretty strongly here because of the environment. Now, I wish they had done a little bit more, maybe gotten a veteran receiver. Maybe they still do at some point to add to Thielen at some point. Amari Cooper and Keenan Allen are still out there. That would give us a little bit more confidence. But again, from where he was, just to be on the radar as a QB2, possibly the top 20, is a big accomplishment for Bryce Young when you look like he was a bust after one season.
Yeah, and the guys he's going after and Drake May and Trevor Lawrence and Tua and Stafford and even McCarthy, like I would prefer to take the shot on Bryce Young after what we saw from last season. And like Michael Penix Jr. is going right next to him too, and Geno Smith. I'd much rather Bryce Young. But I mean, even last year, overall, the year was poor for him as a whole. Averaged 16 fantasy points per game last year. But that was still more than Jordan Love and Caleb Williams and CJ Stroud and Trevor Lawrence and Dak Prescott. Yeah, all those guys are given another chance, right? And Bryce Young, he showed the potential at the end of last year from weeks 12 through 18, which is a third of the season. He averaged 20.8 fantasy points per game during that span. And he was the quarterback 2 and the quarterback 1 overall in 2 of the last 3 weeks. Like I do think he showed the potential that he can have with Dave Canales, and that was throwing to Jalen Coker and Adam Thielen and Xavier Legette struggling as a rookie. Like not a lot of great options out there that he was doing great. He was producing for fantasy at the end of last season. Now you add in who I think can be a true wide receiver 1 in the NFL, and Tetairoa McMillan. I do think he can really take that next step forward. Now, I don't know how high, right? Because like, what's his ceiling? Does he have a top 10 fantasy ceiling? I do think last year showed us he might. It's hard to rank him up there because there's just too many other guys that you feel a little bit more comfortable with. But like I brought up, the Jordan Loves, the Dak Prescott, the CJ Stroud, Drake May, I'm fine with having Bryce Young over all of those guys. So I personally think that Bryce Young should be closer ranked to like quarterback 15 than in the 20s.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, 15 to 20 seems just about right for him. And again, the upside is definitely there. Where Tua, I think, is more on the downside. I mean, Michael Penix, I mean, it's not like his receiving core is smashing it in relation to what Young has right now. And again, the running is always going to be a difference when you're going to split ties here late. I mean, McCarthy could do some running, so maybe I wouldn't go as far as McCarthy personally, just because, again, that system is so good with Kevin O'Connell and having the best receiver, one of the best receivers, the best receiver, at least in the NFC, and Justin Jefferson. So, look, if McMillan can be good right away, he's going to unlock a lot here for Bryce Young. So it really comes down to him and what he can do. So McMillan's presence is there to help Bryce Young, but it'll be interesting to see how much we're interested in McMillan's standalone value here. So we'll talk about the wide receiver core in our next segment here.
Yeah, let's get to that group because it's not just Tetairoa McMillan, and we have to figure out what his ceiling is and what his floor is right now, ranked as the wide receiver 34. But you have Adam Thielen, who was the wide receiver 28 on average last year. Like, is he still fantasy relevant? And then you have Xavier Legette coming into his second year. So a lot of interesting pieces here to figure out for fantasy in 2025. We'll get to that in just a moment.
All right, the NBA playoffs are reaching the conference finals here. The Pacers are in. It's looking really good here for the Knicks, as Jason Tatum's down for the Celtics, and you also have the Warriors down Steph Curry there. So the Timberwolves look like they'll advance, but we have a big game coming up here. The Thunder, the number 1 seed there with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, they're back in control, up 3-2. So there's still a lot of mystery on who's going to win the NBA title. Or the best way to get on this action here as we get closer is the NBA Playoff Hub. That's FanDuel Sportsbook. Every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot, which we've seen a lot of those, or breakout player, there's never been a better time to get on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live during the game. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans even have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. So you got SGA and Nikola Jokic. There's a lot of props to be had there, as well as the team that you feel better about there, Oklahoma City or Denver. So put it all together, and you can look and see who you've got to read on who's heating up, and why not back it up with that same game parlay. And how about a $200 bonus in bets to add to the excitement? Yeah, that's all there at FanDuel. New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Michelle, let's dive into this Panthers receiving core. As we hinted at, Tetairoa McMillan is the new go-to guy. He's ranked 34.5 point PPR. Then we have Adam Thielen at 62, Xavier Legette at 66, Jalen Coker 67. That tells you no one's quite sure how it's going to work out between those three. And then you have a tight end and Ja'Tavion Sanders, as promised. He's well off the radar, however, as a tight end 3 and tight end 27 on the board. So, again, I don't know exactly what you're going to get from this receiving core, but I know just by having McMillan as clear-cut outside go-to guy, it's going to be much improved.
Yeah, and I really do. I just really like McMillan coming out of school. I mean, obviously most people did, and obviously the Panthers did because he went number 8 overall in the draft. But I do think he just gives Bryce Young that big body to target deeper. That's going to come down with the contested catches. That doesn't have to be the perfectly placed ball. But this is exactly who Bryce Young has needed, who hasn't had. He's had Adam Thielen, who's an older wide receiver that's just really a slot guy, and even he missed half a season last year. And he was getting it done with Jalen Coker and some games with Deontay Johnson and a good game with David Moore. He was working with these really, lower level wide receiver guys. I don't want to call Adam Thielen lower level, but at this age of his career, he's not an above average wide receiver. I wouldn't think at this point of being a playmaker for your quarterback. I do think McMillan offers him that and then offers him touchdown opportunities as well. And McMillan being at wide receiver 34 ranking, I do think is very fair. I mean, we see these guys land in landing spots where maybe it doesn't seem like the best ever with a quarterback, but he should right away step into the lead role. They'll be the lead target guy with the Panthers. And when you're looking at McMillan or George Pickens, they're going back to back. I mean, I think I'm going to just lean with the upside of McMillan than going with Pickens, who's the number 2 with the Cowboys now.
Yeah, you do have to look at McMillan. I think he's maybe underlooked as a bit of a talent here. I mean, everyone just looked at this receiving core and they had some questions, even with the next guys on the board. Emeka Egbuka, we like a lot on the show. Matthew Golden can be a threat as well for the Packers. But McMillan was still the clear number 1. And all said and done, he was taken above all these guys. And it's because he's what Canales wants. We've had Mike Evans. So he does the 2 things that Mike Evans does pretty well: stretch the field and score touchdowns. And that's an easy path there. If you don't have to have as many receptions, get some big plays, that helps because you can get by with less target volume and less target efficiency. And the other thing is, if you score, it's a lot easier to get a touchdown than 60 yards receiving in a game, right? That's just the way it is. So if you can add that element, if you can score 6 to 8 touchdowns here, that's a big kind of change in relation to some other guys that are not known for finding the end zone. So I do like McMillan quite a bit here. Again, it's a lot of these guys, right? We have a Calvin Ridley is a good example. Another kind of number 1 on a team that there's not a lot else. So there's 2 ways to look at it. You can say, there's no one to take pressure off this guy, so he's going to get all the attention. But the other way you can look at it, he's going to get so much volume that it doesn't really matter that the quarterback's going to throw to him so often that he could come up with a 55 to 60% catch rate, and he can still be more effective than like a guy that's a number two, as Michelle has pointed out. So again, I'm into McMillan. I think it's very hard for me, however, to justify wanting to go after anyone else in this receiving core, because I got to wait and see, because this team could barely sustain a fantasy viable receiver in any given week, let alone the entire year, right? So I'm going to be careful there. I don't have any interest in these guys. If I had to go with someone, Michelle, and as I always look at it, it's the guy that's the cheapest. That's Jalen Coker. And there's some established chemistry here with what Bryce Young can do, where Thielen's getting a little older. He might be kind of phased out a little bit with McMillan taking over. And to legit, I need to see a lot more from him to really believe in him as a second-round pick on this team. They do like him, but again, if they liked him a lot, they would have not taken McMillan so early. So that's what I'm reading into. So McMillan, and then Coker, I'll take a flyer on him late, but in the middle, I'll avoid it.
Yeah, I'm going to just take the chance on McMillan over anyone else in this offense, because wide receiver 34 is just not too high for me to be worried about it. Yeah. I do want to talk about Adam Thielen's cost, though, because he's wide receiver 62 cost, and he was the wide receiver 28 on average last year. Even the year prior, he was doing, some things for fantasy too and outperforming expectations. Now, the thing with Adam Thielen, though, is that even if you look at his game logs from last year, he has 5 or 6 games. Yeah, 6 games in there with fewer than 7 fantasy points, and he missed a handful of games too. So, and then some pretty solid games throughout the rest, but it's very, very inconsistent. However, does he really deserve to be brought down to all the way to 62? That seems very, very low. I mean, he's going around guys like Romeo Doubs and Quentin Johnston and Xavier Legette, his own, and Jalen Coker, right? Like his own teammates, Alec Pierce. I don't know if Adam Thielen should be that low. It's not like I'm excited to draft him, but he does give you more value than that. Like you can plug him into your flex, and in any given week, he can give you 12 to 19 fantasy points, right? And maybe he'll disappoint, but he can come through with that. However, he does turn 35 years old in August. When does he officially hit like the end of his career?
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of getting in that Keenan Allen territory where he's borderline. We still want to look at him. Keenan Allen, I think, is 33, 34. So kind of very similar players, and the fact that they're both kind of big slots, and maybe that's the key to surviving in the NFL as a receiver, is you play the big slot. So the question is not Thielen cutting into McMillan snaps, because he's going to be an outside guy. The question is, who is Bryce Young going to look to more in key situations as the big body to go up and get the ball and get those cheap points through scores and all that? So, again, if you're looking at McMillan at 34, and it's kind of a strange thing because this team hasn't had really a lot of vacated targets when you look at it, because they haven't had anybody to dominate targets well enough to have to replace them. So when you look at it, I mean, 62, maybe a little bit low, but I just think if I'm going to pick the 3, I'm going to pick the guy with the most upside, and I think that's Coker, and they separate. But again, Thielen, I think putting any of these guys at 60 is a bit of a stretch. I would be more in the 50s, especially with Thielen and Coker. Again, no interest in Legette all together, but we'll watch training camp, see how this kind of develops here, how the progressions go for Bryce Young, how much McMillan is being targeted, who's on the field with him in 11 personnel. That'll give us a better idea of where we want to go with this team. But again, Thielen, you can take a shot on him or Coker if you want, but McMillan is the real guy that you can expect anything close to a starting lineup type asset here in 2025.
Now, Jatavian Sanders, the tight end they took in the 4th round last year, I really liked him coming out of Texas. I am a Longhorns fan. And he did show a little bit of promise throughout the year. I mean, it was a ton of terrible games where he was barely used at all, but some games that he did get targeted, like 6 targets, he caught all 6 of them for 6 receptions, 61 yards in week 7. In week 9, when he had 5 targets, he caught 4 of them for 87 yards. Another game, he had, just 2 targets, but caught a touchdown in that game. So he did show some promise when they actually targeted him. Will he step up in his second year? We know these tight ends, they can take a second to get going, especially if you weren't drafted in the first couple of rounds. It's just like, will Dave Canales' offense use a tight end in that way, especially now that they took McMillan? I think that's the hard part to decipher here. But if he gets an opportunity and gets more target share, I really do love Jatavian Sanders as a prospect and as a talent. So He's going all the way at tight end 27 right now. I just wanted to ask you, like, if you're going to take a chance on a very, very late round tight end, like you're completely punting the position. We talked about Brenton Strange last week when we were hitting on the Jaguars' top 3 storylines. Would you rather take a shot on Brenton Strange, who's going into that starting lineup for the Jaguars, or go with a guy like Jatavian Sanders?
Yeah, based on how it's going right now, I think Brenton Strange is going to top out as, I don't know, maybe the 4th target on his team. We'll see if Sanders can carve out that key role here, right? Because I don't think they haven't established 2, assuming McMillan is the 1 here. So it's pretty close. I think I would go Sanders because I think he's a better pure receiver than Strange. I don't know. I think both names are worthy. You should put them on their radar, especially in deeper leagues, tight end premium, where you're looking for some depth. I would definitely look at both of those players, but I'd say Sanders barely. But again, this is a wait and see. Let's get a lot more information, the best information we can on the Panthers to see how McMillan kind of reshapes this receiving rotation and target share for Canales and Young.
Now, Chuba Hubbard was one of the biggest surprises of fantasy for last season. Jonathan Brooks goes down with another terrible knee injury. It looks like he's going to probably miss the majority of 2025, if not the whole thing. But then they signed Rico Dowdle in free agency. Does that hurt Hubbard or not? Should we be drafting Hubbard high? Is he being underrated, overrated? We will discuss this Panthers backfield to close today's show. Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting. The NFL draft is over, but the roster moves and news never stop. Hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Let's finish up our talk about the Panthers offseason. And Chuba Hubbard, I mean, he just really outperformed what anyone thought last year. Running back 12 on average scoring last season. Now, though, ranked as running back 18. So it's a little bit lower than what he did last year. And honestly, it was even better than running back 12 average last season because from weeks 3 through 16, he missed the last 2 weeks of the season. He was a running back 9. The first couple of weeks, he didn't get the workload that he got the rest of the year. So he really was killing it. But now Rico Dowdle, when he got the chance last year, though, with the Cowboys, he did pretty well, too. Not Hubbard status. But them signing Dowdle, is this going to be more of a split backfield? Or you still just think this is Hubbard's backfield completely?
Yeah, let's look at it from where we were last year, right? With the injury to Brooks, he had to default to Miles Sanders. He was basically 0. And let's go back into Miles Sanders' career with the Eagles when he was having his best season. He had 1 year where they kind of deployed him out of necessity as a receiver, but pretty much he was a straight-up running back for them in Philadelphia. The difference with Rico Dowdle is he started as kind of the change of pace guy behind their starters there in Dallas. So he kind of waited his turn, then Ezekiel Elliott and everything blew up in that backfield. So then it was time for Dowdle to kind of take over and really good. I think he was actually more surprising in some ways. I think Hubbard, the big surprise was that he finishes RB12. But Dowdle, I didn't even think was going to be a startable, consistent asset. I liked him as a bit of a sleeper, but the fact that he finished at RB24 in average scoring is pretty impressive, right? We were writing off the Cowboys. Maybe this way the Cowboys are not investing too much in running back if they can get production from somebody. But when you look at it, Dowdle, I think is a bigger threat, right? I mean, they look at Brooks' injury. It was devastating. So they need someone who was viable to cut into the touches of Hubbard. They did, however, pay Hubbard, extend him. They like him quite a bit in this offense. But I think you just have to open your mind to the fact that Dowdle might cut into some of the touches because, again, they wouldn't have got such a prominent backup, right? This is actually a prominent backup that isn't just some guy that they threw away and added, right? He's a guy that, as we saw, came up with a very productive season. So I just don't think we need to worry too much. I think when you look at it, I think Dowdle might be underrated here with 43, dropping that far down for being kind of a change of pace guy. I would say he's a good maybe 38 to 40, a little bit there. That's where you would rank him. I think Chuba Hubbard's already been adjusted, though, to RB18. So that's already 6 spots. I mean, it's half a spot there. I think that's fair, right? I think it's a guy that's going to see the volume, going to be the guy, and they like him. He can stay on the field on receiving downs and all that. So I think Dowdle, however, it might end up being a premium handcuff, as much as you can have a premium handcuff on the Panthers, but he can definitely step in there and do a lot of the same things that Hubbard does. So sometimes you look at complement versus supplement, which are important words, because complement says this guy is going to do what this guy can't do, or supplement is just a backup who can be more interchangeable with that lead back. And I think Dowdle is the latter. He's a guy that is more interchangeable with Hubbard, so that actually may play into Hubbard's favor than somebody if they got a big bruising power back. That may have been bad, but I think this is okay. And again, he's already been adjusted to reasonable expectations at RB2. I just think Dowdle needs to be bumped up closer to RB3 flex range.
Yeah, I think the adjustment in the consensus ranks is actually perfect at running back 18. Yeah. I think that's very fair. He was playing on so many snaps last year. 85% of the team snaps he played on from week 6 through 16 before his injury. Like, that is going to go down. And his production, obviously, in fantasy points went down greatly compared to, the games he got 25 plus touches, which he was averaging 24 fantasy points per game. And then in the 11 games with less than 25 touches, which is a ton of touches, by the way, only 11.2 fantasy points per game in those games. It's going to be somewhere in the middle there. He's still going to get a lot of work. He's still going to see a lot of snaps, but it will go down a little bit. So I do think the move down in the ranking is very fair. And I think that cost is plenty fine for him. But that will be it for today's show. We have the schedule release coming out tonight. So tomorrow we will be hitting on all the fun aspects of the schedule and how it will impact fantasy, especially to start the season. So don't miss that episode. And then we'll come back on Friday and finish up the NFC South talking about the Atlanta Falcons. So we will talk to you then. Bye, y'all.